Hi, and welcome to my home. My name is Jay Shifman. I'm a mental health and substance misuse and recovery speaker, coach, and advocate, and the host of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Really quickly, before I begin, I want to give a quick heads up. There are a few mentions of suicide and overdose in my speech, and if that's not something you want to hear, my feelings aren't going to be hurt if you press skip on this one. Now, I do have to let you know who I was when I got to NKU in the summer of 2011. As of spring of this year, when we were bungling the initial handling of the pandemic, I was celebrating 10 years in recovery from a struggle with substance misuse and addiction, which, as the math majors can tell you, means I was just about a year into recovery when I got to NKU. But before you assume you know my story, let me tell you that while you may actually identify with a good part of it, it's not the one you're thinking of. See, my story of substance misuse is not the one that we've heard before, and it's certainly not the one that we got during Nancy Reagan's Just Say No videos or DARE or anything like that. To put it more clearly, I didn't start misusing substances after a friend passed me a joint underneath the bleachers in the 7th grade gym class. It's also not the one that's been on the front page of all our papers for a while now. You know, the high school quarterback who gets his knee blown up in a game is prescribed opioids and switches to heroin. But just because my story is a little bit different doesn't mean I didn't end up in the same spot. Mornings on my bathroom floor, going through withdrawal, and days spent spread out on my couch, unable to do much more. Struggling with addiction is often a debilitating experience, and mine was no different. What was different for me was that origin story. While I enjoyed a few illicit drugs, I really enjoyed a few illicit drugs, that wasn't my struggle. I could stop smoking weed. I could stop experimenting with shrooms. I could stop doing all the things that you see on your evening news. But what I couldn't stop doing is taking my prescription pills. I was prescribed over 15 different drugs in my life, from Ritalin in my preteens to lithium in my early 20s. When I was at my worst, I was on over 5 different drugs every day and was prescribed hundreds of milligrams of chemicals. I showed my prescribing records to a doctor not too long ago, and I asked him, in his professional opinion, what he would call somebody being prescribed this sort of treatment in an outpatient setting. And he said, "Jay, I only have one word for you, and that word is criminal." Now, some of you may recognize that story. As an older millennial, let me drop just a little bit of data on you, talking about what has been done to us, a story that hasn't gotten that much focus. According to the National Institute of Health, and they know a little thing or two, the year that I turned 1987, just about 400,000 kids were collectively treated in the US for what we call ADHD, sort of an umbrella of conditions. Attention hyperactivity disorder. I think most of y'all know what that is by now. By 1997, the year that I turned 11 and myself was diagnosed with this, that number had exploded to just under 2 million young people in the US. See, we the millennials, we were the first guinea pigs in a still ongoing experiment aimed at treating rambunctiousness and finding a way to force kids through our antiquated education system. And if you think that this has gotten better, I'm really sorry. I have some bad news for you. As you probably know, because you lived through it as well, that number is now 4.5 million students every year. See, we know that inundating a developing brain with chemicals can have disastrous side effects. That was known back then too, but it wasn't as acted upon. When I started showing these side effects, my therapist decided that instead they were symptoms of a bigger issue, bipolar disorder. And he was quick to dispense even more drugs for that. Now, before you label me as anti-drug, I got to be clear, that's not the case. I do believe that a lot of these drugs can be helpful for the right people. And while I do take issue with our new craze, giving people high levels of chemicals while also not undergoing concurrent behavioral work with a therapist, I do believe that diagnosing and treating issues of mental health and substance misuse, they are some of the greatest developments of our time. But the problem is the people who work in these fields, they're just that. They're people, and they're fallible. And I was one of the ones that they failed. Now, you all don't need to know the full story because, quite frankly, this isn't about me. But let me help you understand how I got from there to NKU in the summer of 2011. When I turned 23 in 2009, between then and the spring of 2010, I had survived 2 overdose attempts. Nope, 2 suicide attempts, an overdose, 3 weeks in a lockdown facility, 3 months in a long-term care facility, and finally, 3 more months undergoing what we call a step-down detox. See, I was so hooked on chemicals that if I just stopped in one day, the combined withdrawal would have literally killed me. And so it took me 3 months to get off of everything I was on. But in the spring of 2010, for the first time in over a decade, there was nothing in my system. And that was the day that my life started over. And that's who I was when I arrived at NKU just about a year later. I transferred from Cincinnati State to the psychology department at NKU under Professor Jeffrey Smith, who was also my advisor, and I was so lucky. Unsurprisingly, my experience left me fascinated with the mind. I yearned to understand what had happened to me, and even more so, how someone could do what they did to me. While I'm still struggling to figure that second part out, NKU did give me a fascinating look into not only my own mind, but how we think as individuals and members of this community at large that we find ourselves in. And sincerely, I can't thank NKU enough for that. I'll be honest, I was never a good student. Despite growing up in the private school system, I failed out of 2 colleges before I got to NKU. And yes, some of that was the drugs. But NKU taught me to be a student in a way that I had never known before. I was so excited to be at NKU in an environment that I felt really embraced me as this weird dude that I was back then, and quite frankly still am, that I took every opportunity I could to get more involved. I worked on campus in the school bookstore. I participated in campus events and clubs. I studied abroad in Ireland, which, by the way, if you have the opportunity to do so, definitely do, because it was the most incredible experience I ever had. And after I graduated, I actually came back to NKU to work for a year and a half in the fundraising department. Clearly, as I sit here talking to you in an NKU shirt, I still care about this university a lot, and I'm a yearly donor because of it. But it actually doesn't end there. If any of y'all think that this face looks kind of familiar, it's because you've probably seen me before. So exuberant was my celebration that I walked across the stage on graduation day to shake former President Jeff Mearns' hand, that pictures of me expertly captured by the school's photographer are still used on ads to celebrate graduation twice a year. Now, I've never told this story in this context before, but that graduation didn't go exactly as planned, and there's a little bit more to that excited celebration. Quick distinction, though, to help you understand this. While I'm in recovery, I'm not sober. My issues were never with alcohol, and while I still am wary about taking any medication that isn't absolutely necessary, you never really know what's going to trigger you again. I'd have no problem having a drink and enjoying it safely, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. Being from Cincinnati, my wife and I are huge bourbon fans. I got to tell you, a good whiskey is a blessed thing. And so on graduation day, a friend of mine who had come into town to celebrate this incredible day with me, remember, it wasn't that long before this that nobody thought I'd ever make it to this point, let alone myself. So my friend comes in town, and we're sitting outside in the car before we go into the arena, and we knock back a few. And so we walk inside, and he gets to go up to the sit in the bleachers with everybody else. But I'm sitting down there on the floor in my cap and gown, and something dawns on me. I really, really have to pee. Like, really have to pee. Now, by the time I get to the podium, I was so excited to cross that stage, not just because of how far I'd come. And yeah, obviously that was first in my mind, but you have no idea how excited I was to finally get to a bathroom. So I shake President Mearns' hand, and I run off the other side of the stage, straight to a bathroom. I don't even pause for the customary shaking the hand picture. No. Shook his hand and sprinted off the side of the stage to the bathroom. And it was like manna from heaven. I was so excited to get to this bathroom. But when I get back to my row, it becomes very clear that the people sitting with me hadn't saved my seat for me. So when I go to sit down, the woman helping guide us was like, sweetie, I don't know where you think you're going, but you're not going in that row. So I keep getting directed farther and farther back. And finally, they make me take a seat 10 rows behind the closest person because they were like, no, we have to save seats for everyone that was in line. You have to sit in the far back now. So my friends and family have all these pictures of me sitting 10, 12 rows away from the closest person. I looked dejected. I looked like a person who was just told that they weren't actually going to graduate. And no, those aren't the pictures that they use to celebrate graduation. Now, I tell that story not just because I think it's hilarious, but because it's hard for people to see triumph in things they don't understand. That's just the way our brains work. That's not throwing shade at anybody. We just love stories. We love relating to shared experiences. And when I first began telling my recovery story, I usually framed it through the triumph of something else, getting my first job or something around that incredible graduation. But the honest truth is that sort of narrative minimizes the real victory in my recovery story, which is that I'm still here. I allowed the stigma around these narratives, around these topics of mental health and substance misuse, to shame me into keeping silent and private for the first 5 years of my recovery. 5 full years where I held on to this thing as a mark of shame. I didn't want anyone to know how badly I had failed. But that's the thing. I didn't fail. The truth is, I was so sick. I was so hooked on chemicals that I shouldn't be here today. I attempted suicide twice. I overdosed, and I'm still here. Now comes the part where I have to ask something of you. We are absolutely facing a crisis of issues of mental health and substance misuse in this country, and we're not even talking about it. Guys, the story isn't the drugs. The story is us. Over the last decade, the U.S. ranks first in the share of population that struggles with substance misuse in the world. And we're in the top 20% in rates of suicide. Every year, over 125,000 Americans lose their lives just to suicide and overdose combined. I'm not even talking about the other causes of death that come with these issues. I'm just talking about overdose and suicide. Those are our friends, our neighbors, our family members. That's more than any other non-natural cause of death by a long shot. That number is roughly equal to what this country has lost to COVID-19. Now imagine this crisis every year for a decade. And yet those stories aren't on front pages because we've allowed the anti-drug rhetoric to convince us that those who use drugs are bad people, that those who struggle with mental health are others. And neither of these could be farther from the truth. When someone pictures an addict, okay, they don't picture me. And that's part of the problem. The conversation has to begin here. We're not funding either one of these issues in a substantial way, and we're allowing the stigma around mental health and substance misuse to end the conversations before they begin and prevent any action. This has to change, or we're going to keep repeating our mistakes, and people will continue to die at rates unseen in countries we consider to be worse off than our own. We're dying in droves, and no one is willing to start the conversation, and that is shameful. I don't want to sound overly pessimistic. While I don't believe the wholesale system change that I want to see happen is in our near future, thanks a lot, boomers, there are many things we can do every day that will allow us to have a little bit of an impact. I know this sounds cheesy, I know, but I believe in the idea of waves. And before you start worrying, the NKU hired a speaker that thinks what happens in the ocean is a myth or God's divine will or something like that. Those aren't the waves I'm talking about. When I say waves, I mean the way that small actions can ripple out and create change through positive normalization. Actions speak louder than words and all that jazz. You, the members of the Norse Leadership Society, are literally the leaders on campus. But that word can mean a lot of different things. It's easy to be a leader in name, but to paraphrase our favorite musical, Hamilton, real leadership, that's a lot harder. The true leader goes beyond the title. It's a way of life. It's a way of walking the walk. It's living through action. That is what makes a true leader. Now, I had to learn that the hard way. And now I work with clients to help them learn these awful truths without, hopefully, the years of crippling struggle. Think about this for a minute. I'm sure you can all picture that person who knows how to say the right things, but that doesn't make them a leader. A true leader is the person who creates positive change, gets into, as the late true leader John Lewis liked to say, good trouble. Not because the camera or Instagram lives are pointed in their direction, but because it's the right thing to do. We're seeing on a national level what happens when people who aren't true leaders pick up that title and they wear it. It's hollow, it's fake. Imitation leaders thrust into leadership positions, they have disastrous consequences, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. We don't need any more imitation leaders. Just open up Instagram, open up your daily news, take a look around. You can see that we're overflowing with fake leaders as it is. What we need is more true leaders. I had to come to that realization in a really difficult way. Social media, politics, movies, etc. We're all shown time and time again how to be a leader in name only. But learning how to be a true leader, that's so much more difficult. Often it takes peeling back the curtain to find where most of the true leaders are actually living. It's in quiet actions, those behind the scenes moments. That's what most of the true leaders are. And clearly, I'm not trying to say that anyone in front of a camera isn't a true leader. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that it takes a lot of work to spot the true leaders in a sea of fake ones. Part of being a true leader is recognizing your particular struggle. Now, personally, I believe there's a reason that I'm still alive when so many others in my situation died. And I think that I found it. I preach the mantra of choose your struggle. It's my buzzword, my personal hashtag. It's the name of my company and the name of my podcast. I literally wear it on my wrist every day. I love it because for so long, I didn't get to choose what I was struggling for. Just getting through the day, getting off the couch, being a real person, avoiding withdrawals. Those were my struggles. Now, I get to choose. And it's this. The crisis of mental health and substance misuse, they are the defining issues of this time because they affect everybody across all superficial boundaries we are creating for ourselves. It's time we came together to end it, but it starts with having the conversations. We have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We have to find comfort in the uncomfortable. In reality, sitting with our uncomfortable, sitting with our darkness, and then pushing past it, that is where we find personal growth, and that is where we find universal community growth. Now, I have a saying on my podcast, empathy begets empathy and vulnerability begets vulnerability. So how about we start there? When you sign off today, when you leave this, wherever you are that you're listening to this, and next time you see a friend, ask them how they are and don't take that BS, I'm fine, for an answer. Or tell them how you are. And more importantly, how you're struggling and what you're struggling for. My name is Jay Shifman. You can find me at my website, jayshifman.com, or pretty much any social media link on the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Reach out. I want to hear from you. I want to know what you're struggling for. I want to know how you're finding real leaders in the sea of fake leaders. But the most important thing, go show your empathy. Embrace your vulnerability. Spread your love. Try to live as a true leader. And the most important, choose your struggle.